Hi, my name is Gabriel Cordero, and I'd like to speak about my aunt, Lizette Cordero. Now, I've already done the GoFundMe video where I discussed the legal battle that I'm in for my aunt's legacy and to protect my grandmother's life, but this is the video that I wanted to do. This is the video that's more personal. It was back in April of 2018 where I was entrusted to bring my grandmother back from New Jersey to her home in Arizona where she was living with my Aunt Lizette. I arrived with her at the airport at the front desk, explaining that a reservation was waiting for my grandmother because of her handicap. She needed a wheelchair, in addition to her service animal, her pet. I was assured that the reservation wasn't needed, that I can proceed to get our tickets. So I went to grab my ticket at the booth, at the kiosk, and no sooner do I print out my ticket and turn around that I see my grandmother now standing, wheelchair gone. So I knew she couldn't stand for long, so I tried to take her over to get her ticket, and I was informed that I wasn't able I wasn't going to be able to get her ticket unless she had her wheelchair. So for no lie, like 20 minutes, it's like this back and forth thing where I'm either trying to get her wheelchair, where I'm told she needs her ticket, and then when I go to get her ticket, I'm told she needs a wheelchair. So when I finally get a wheelchair for her, I go back to the that front ticket booth and I tell them, all right, I need now to go to security in order to get this process moving along so we can make our flight. And then they tell me, oh, we have your grandmother's reservation here. The same ticket booth, the same person who told me they didn't need to know my grandmother's information because she didn't need a reservation, now has their reservation given to me. If that wasn't enough of a headache, in TSA security, I had to be on a separate line from my grandmother because she was handicapped. She had metal in her knees, and she had her service animal, so she had to be on a completely separate line. That took forever as well. I'm saying to myself, there's no way we're making this flight. So, astonishingly, we did, and only because the flight was delayed because of a repair needed for the engine. But I tell you, we made it to the plane, skin of my teeth, and the rest of the flight mercifully went well. But between trying to get my grandmother's ticket, to us getting to security, to us having to run across the airport just to get on the flight, I was spent when we were boarded. 6 hour flight. Luckily, there was my grandmother and her pet. Everything was fine with them. But even landing, I was still exhausted. I got the rental car that I had ordered, and it was off to my aunt's home. I say all that to say this. When I arrived with my grandmother, my aunt had a plate, a warm plate, waiting for me. And that meant the world to me. You might be saying to yourself, what what's the big deal? It's just a meal. But after the headaches that I had gone through and just getting on that flight and getting my grandmother back home, it meant a lot to me that my aunt took the time to make a meal for me. Beef penne pasta, in case anyone's wondering. So that's just one of the things that I loved and adored about my aunt. Growing up, it was something heartwarming for me, knowing that I had that cool aunt. You know what I mean? Whenever when I was going to school, whether grammar school or high school, there was always what I call the competition. Do not show up to the first day of school or back from winter break wearing the same clothes as previous months of the previous school year. My aunt knew that like intuitively. And it's not something that she ever judged, you know what I mean? She understood it. She understood that, kids compete that way, and more than anything else, the understanding that no kid wants to go through that ridicule. And she always got me and other younger members of my family, just, brand names. And look, it's not all about that level of materialism, but it was just appreciated that she always was like on top of things like that. And she didn't have to be. That's the role of someone's parent, not an aunt, especially to the lengths that she went. An aunt, let's be honest, or an uncle, they just, need to give a gift or two at all of the celebrations of birthdays and Christmas and the like, but she always went above and beyond. Even her ex-boyfriend, and I didn't even learn this until the time of my aunt's passing, her ex-boyfriend related to me that even when my grandmother couldn't afford a gift or didn't know what gift to get, my aunt would buy my grandmother's gift for me and still write that it was from my grandmother. It's things like that you always want to hear about someone. You want to hear stories like that show truly how big their heart really was, how much they care. This apartment, that it's still my first apartment that I have. When I first got it, I'll never forget, I invited her along with my grandmother and other relatives here. And not to brag, not to imply that I'm asking for anything, just to show them, just so that they can see that I'm progressing with my life, just so that they can share in the celebration of me having gotten my first apartment. It wasn't anything more than that, but my aunt took it upon herself. It was her idea to have a housewarming for me. She was the one that organized it. She was the one that handled invites. And it meant a lot to me that she was so proud of me for getting my first apartment. And at such a young age. I got it when I was 24. And I'll never forget the day after the party, she's texting me and she's telling me how proud she is of me. And one thing that always gave me a sense of pride is that she would always say that she felt like I was her son. And she would go on to talk about how alike she and I were. There wasn't any greater sense of accomplishment between she and I when she would share that with me. And my aunt, she was more expressive in how much she cared for people through acts like that instead of in person. She was never really the type to gush or anything like that. She would always either show you how much she cared, or the times that we would text, she would write that to me. And it meant the world. It meant the world that someone would care enough to go out on a limb for someone like that, someone like me. And when she would relate sentiments like that she felt like I was her son, it meant a great deal to me. So many, in terms of things that people would say about her, everyone would always agree that she had the type of laugh that could light up a room and the type of smile that could brighten up your day. And her same ex-boyfriend's brother said something similar along the lines. At the time of her passing, during COVID, her company that she worked for, the Arizona State Department of Economy, when they put together what they refer to as a celebration of life, a video package commemorating my aunt, many of them would say the same thing, how her laughter was just so contagious. You know what I mean? Have you ever met someone like that who they might laugh at a joke that you don't think is particularly funny, but just the amount of joy that they have and just the the bass in their voice when they laugh, like puts a smile on your face and you start to laugh. That's it's things like that that to this day I remember my aunt for. I remember when she took my grandmother out to live out in Arizona because my grandmother had a whole host of physical and mental issues that, it, as independent as my grandmother wanted to be, with all of these ailments, my aunt recognized that my grandmother needed someone to actually live with because she was previously living alone. When my aunt took my grandmother to go out to live with her in Arizona, I would call my grandmother, just to check in, but my aunt would relate to me that she would feel bad because my grandmother would feel bad because she would feel depression over not having spoken to me. And I would tell her, Titi, I just spoke to her last week. I didn't understand the severity of my grandmother's depression and her amnesia. To my grandmother, because she couldn't remember what she had for breakfast this very day if you asked her, even back then, my aunt would relate to me how if a certain amount of time, a couple of days went by, and I hadn't, even after having spoken to her a couple of days back, my grandmother would forget, and then she'd feel depressed, and she would relate to my aunt that she would feel as though I think that my grandmother has passed away. Like, that's how I'm treating her. Like, she's no longer with us anymore. So I said to myself, all right, I made it a habit of calling my aunt and speaking to my grandmother over video chat weekly. Every weekend, I would make sure to speak to her. That way, if it's not fresh in her mind, at least the waning period after I speak to her, it will be less until I call inevitably again. So at first it was a not I don't want to say a chore, but it was just I found difficulty weaving that into my schedule because my we all know what adulting is and what it's like, and I just always have so many things going on, and my weekends are very important because I don't get to do everything that I want to or can do during the week. So at first, it was a little difficult to weave calling them into my schedule, especially every weekend, but I grew to really look forward to those calls. Telling my aunt how I'm doing, her relating to me what's going on in Arizona and how my grandmother is. Just intentionally saying the most outlandish things that I could think of to my grandmother just to put a smile on her face, just to make her laugh and for her to tell her how ridiculous I was. I mean, it's no lie to say that those calls were not only something that I looked forward to on my weekends, but definitely the highlight of my weekends. I miss those. I hope that every family has a Lizette. Someone who really does go out on a limb for family. And again, they might not always be the most expressive in person. They could be more sociable, but they would always someone like my aunt. I would hope that every family has someone who would show their love for family. My aunt never had kids of her own, but she would spread that love out amongst her nieces and her favorite nephew. And I genuinely hope that every family does have someone like that, at least one person like that in said family. Just just a genuine inspiration and someone who legitimately cares. And the point that I really want to get across doesn't have to go out on a limb. I think back to all the times that my aunt did, all the times that she would throw me a housewarming, or she would throw me a going away party when I went off to college. She didn't have to do any of these things. The purchase of gifts, always making sure that I'm okay, giving me any kind of financial tips or conversations about LinkedIn and career. She could have just been an aunt, but instead she made the decision to be a second mother. The one the one regret that I don't have, in fact, I'm actually happy that in the very limited amount of time that I had with my aunt when I arrived in Arizona in November of 2020, I only had 25 hours with her before I had to admit her to the hospital when she had her panic attack, and that was the last time I ever saw her until she passed away. The one moment that I'm glad that she and I got to share, the one sentiment that I'm glad that I expressed to her, is that when I was out with her and my grandmother out in Arizona, that felt like home more to me than my hometown, than my first apartment. The warmth and the love, you got to be able to you have to be able to acknowledge what moments and places and spaces like that mean to you, and the people that make them that way, that make that warmth that's welcoming and inviting. I miss my aunt dearly, and I hope relating this story can give you an idea why it is that I've been fighting for 5 years, why it is that I have to keep this fight going. When you see that a legacy is on the line and someone else thought to capitalize on that, sought to exploit the hard work, someone else's life work for their own benefit, you realize, you recognize what it is that you owe that person. That you can continue the fight after their death when you couldn't save them in life. I couldn't save my aunt from COVID, but I can fight in her name to ensure that her legacy remains protected and doesn't serve someone else's means, doesn't serve someone else's plate. The first thing that was stolen that belonged to my aunt was her urn, which I paid for. With the exception of my grandmother, who was obviously the most important piece of this puzzle. This was getting my grandmother back was step one. If there was one thing that I'm proud that I was able to get back, it was my aunt's urn. It served as a reminder to me for the last 2.5 years that I have to keep this fight going. I wish it wasn't the case that I would have to create this GoFundMe. I wish it wasn't the case that she passed away. I wish it wasn't the case that she was denied living out the remainder of her life. But the circumstances are what they are. But I can't let this fight go unchallenged. And it pains me to say that I need your help with it. I need support for this fundraiser in order to keep her memory alive, in order to ensure that what she means to me, to my family, is preserved, so that it's understood that despite her passing nearly 5 years ago, that she's not forgotten, And now I'm asking you, please donate what you can. Share this video with those who you may. But don't forget Lizette.